good boy. We'll be ready when they need us.
The morning began the way most mornings did. Quiet. Predictable. Almost invisible. Sunlight stretched slowly across the street, turning the pavement a soft gold. Storefront windows reflected the sky like calm mirrors. Somewhere nearby, a coffee machine hummed. A door closed gently. Life moved forward without asking for attention. The patrol unit gathered near the curb, voices low, movements relaxed. This wasn't the kind of shift that carried urgency. No rushing. No raised tones. Just the familiar rhythm of another day beginning. And then there was the dog. He walked at the end of the line, leash loose, steps measured. His coat caught the light in uneven patches, as if the sun was still getting to know him. He wasn't striking. Not in the way people usually noticed. His ears didn't stand perfectly. His posture wasn't sharp or trained into precision. He was ordinary. That was the word people used. Sometimes with kindness. Sometimes with quiet disappointment. Sweet dog, someone had once said. Not much else, though. The dog didn't react to comments like that. He never had. His eyes stayed forward. His breathing stayed calm. His tail moved in slow, thoughtful arcs, never rushed, never unsure. Beside him walked his handler. The leash rested comfortably in his hand, more habit than effort. He'd learned quickly that this dog didn't pull. Didn't lag. Didn't challenge. He simply stayed close. They started down the street together. Boots against concrete. Leash rings giving a soft clink. Morning air cool against skin. A few people smiled as they passed. One man chuckled lightly. Another shook his head, amused, whispering something to a friend. The handler heard it but didn't respond. He was used to it by now. The dog had been laughed at before. Not openly. Not cruelly. Just dismissed. Too gentle. Too slow. Too soft. The handler glanced down at him. "You're doing fine," he said quietly. The dog didn't look up. He didn't need to. His attention was already somewhere else. As they reached the corner, something changed. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. The dog's pace shifted just slightly. Enough that the handler felt it before he noticed it. The leash didn't tighten. It softened. The dog slowed, his steps becoming smaller, more deliberate. Then he stopped. No command had been given. No signal offered. He simply sat. The handler blinked, surprised. He followed the line of the dog's gaze. There was nothing unusual. Just a building across the street. A bench. A tree swaying gently in the breeze. "Hey, buddy," the handler said softly, giving the leash a light tap. "Come on." The dog stayed seated. His ears tilted, not sharply, but thoughtfully. His head lifted a fraction, nose moving as if he were reading something written into the air. His tail stilled completely. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't stubbornness. It felt like listening. The handler knelt beside him, more curious than concerned. He rested a hand on the dog's back. The warmth there was steady. Grounded. Calm. "What do you see?" he murmured. The dog didn't respond, of course. But his posture said enough. He wasn't tense. He wasn't alert in the usual sense. There was no urgency in his body. Only purpose. The other officers slowed. One stopped. Another turned around. "What's up?" someone asked. The handler shook his head gently. "I don't know." The dog remained still. Time stretched, not uncomfortably, but noticeably. The street seemed quieter now, as if the morning itself had leaned into watch. A car passed. A bird lifted from the sidewalk. The sun climbed higher. Still, the dog stayed. The handler felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest. Not concern. Not doubt. Respect. He'd seen dogs hesitate before. He'd seen distraction. Anxiety. Even fear. This was none of those things. This was certainty. The handler loosened his grip on the leash even more. He didn't pull. Didn't coax. Didn't correct. He waited. The dog shifted his weight slightly, eyes focused forward. His breathing remained slow, even. There was a softness to him, but also a depth the handler hadn't noticed before. Someone laughed quietly behind them. Not unkindly. "Guess he needs a minute," the voice said. The handler didn't turn around. For the first time since being assigned this dog, he didn't feel the need to explain him. He didn't feel the need to defend him. Because in that moment, the dog wasn't asking for permission. He wasn't asking for understanding. He was offering something. The handler finally followed the dog's gaze again, this time more carefully. He noticed small details he might have ignored before. The way the light pooled near the building entrance. The subtle stillness near the bench. Nothing obvious. Nothing dramatic. But something present. The dog's ears relaxed. His head lowered slightly. And then, slowly, he stood. He didn't rush forward. He simply waited. The handler rose with him, heart quietly full of questions he didn't rush to answer. He gave the leash a gentle slack and took a step. The dog stepped too. Whatever this was. Whatever the dog had sensed. It wasn't over. And as they continued down the street together, something had already shifted, not in the patrol, but in the way the handler now looked at the dog beside him. Because sometimes, the ones everyone laughs at are the ones listening most closely. The patrol moved on, but the moment stayed. It followed them quietly, like a thought no one said out loud. The dog walked again at his handler's side, leash loose, steps calm. Nothing about him looked different. No sudden confidence. No proud posture. He hadn't done anything anyone could point to. And yet, the handler kept glancing down at him. Not out of concern. Out of curiosity. They turned onto a quieter street where the morning felt slower. Trees lined the sidewalk, their leaves catching sunlight in soft flashes. A light breeze carried the smell of clean air and distant coffee. Somewhere behind a window, a radio played low. Normal. Peaceful. But the handler's attention no longer drifted. He watched the dog's ears. The subtle tilt of his head. The way his pace adjusted by inches, not steps. This dog wasn't reacting to the world. He was reading it. The handler remembered the file he'd skimmed weeks ago. The notes written in clipped, professional language. Good temperament. Gentle disposition. Limited drive. At the time, those words had felt like polite ways of saying the same thing everyone else thought. Nice dog. Not much else. Now, those words felt unfinished. They reached a small intersection and paused. The handler stopped automatically, checking the crosswalk. The dog stopped too, but again, not quite the same way. This time, he didn't sit. He leaned. Just slightly forward, weight shifting to his front paws. His tail moved once, slow and thoughtful, then went still. His nose lifted, not searching wildly, but calmly, as if greeting something familiar. The handler felt it again. That quiet certainty. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He let the moment settle. Across the street, a woman sat alone on a bench. She stared at her hands, shoulders slightly rounded. Nothing about her signaled distress. No urgency. No visible need. But the dog looked at her. Not intensely. Not alertly. Gently. The handler noticed how the dog's breathing changed, barely. Slower. Deeper. As if he'd matched his rhythm to something outside himself. "You see her?" the handler whispered, almost without realizing he'd spoken. The dog didn't respond. He didn't need to. The light changed. The handler stepped forward. The dog followed, still calm, still focused, but his gaze lingered for one extra heartbeat before they moved on. That heartbeat stayed with the handler. They walked another block. The radio crackled softly at the handler's shoulder. Routine chatter. Check-ins. Ordinary things. But ordinary didn't feel ordinary anymore. The handler began to notice how often the dog checked in, not by looking up, but by adjusting his pace to match the handler's breath. How he chose the inside edge of the sidewalk, subtly positioning himself closer. Not trained behavior. Instinct. They passed a storefront window, and for a brief second, the handler caught their reflection. Himself upright, uniform neat. And the dog beside him, head level, eyes soft, presence steady. He didn't look useless. He looked grounded. Another officer walked up beside them. "Your guy's been quiet today," he said lightly. The handler nodded. "Yeah." There was a pause. The officer glanced down at the dog. "He always like that?" The handler thought about the question longer than expected. "Not always," he said finally. "But, yeah. Kind of." The officer smiled, noncommittal, and drifted back to the group. The handler stayed quiet. They reached a small park area where sunlight filtered through branches, breaking into warm patterns on the path. Children's laughter echoed faintly from a nearby playground, distant and soft. The dog slowed again. Not stopped. Slowed. The handler felt it immediately now. His body recognized the shift before his thoughts did. He adjusted without thinking, matching the dog's pace. The dog turned his head slightly toward a tree near the edge of the park. At its base sat a folded jacket. Nothing remarkable. No movement. No sound. Still, the dog watched. The handler followed his gaze. He saw nothing that required attention. And yet, he didn't pull the leash. He didn't dismiss the moment. He waited. A man emerged from behind the tree, rubbing his arms, blinking in the light. He looked tired. Not distressed, just worn. He nodded politely as he passed, offering a small smile. The dog's tail moved once. The handler felt something loosen in his chest. It wasn't that the dog had found anything. It was that he had noticed. And noticing mattered. As they continued on, the handler realized something quietly profound. This dog wasn't scanning for threats. He wasn't driven by urgency. He was tuned to presence. To pauses. To stillness. To moments people rushed past without seeing. The handler remembered how often this dog had been overlooked. How quickly others had labeled him. How easily they'd laughed. He felt a flicker of regret, not sharp, not painful. Just honest. "I didn't see you either," he murmured. The dog glanced up then. Just briefly. Their eyes met. There was no excitement there. No pride. Just calm recognition. As if the dog had been waiting for that moment all along. They reached the end of the patrol route. The morning had warmed. The light had shifted from gold to something brighter, fuller. The handler unclipped the leash for a moment, letting the dog stretch. The dog didn't wander. He stayed close, sniffing the air, ears relaxed. People passed. Life moved. But something between the handler and the dog had settled into place. Not a conclusion. A beginning. Because the handler now understood something he hadn't before. This dog wasn't here to impress. He wasn't here to perform. He was here to notice what others missed. And soon, that way of seeing was going to matter more than anyone expected. By the third hour of patrol, the handler had stopped pretending nothing had changed. Outwardly, everything looked the same. The route, the rhythm, the easy conversations drifting between officers. But inside him, something had shifted its weight. He walked differently now. Not slower. Not faster. More aware. The dog moved beside him with the same calm presence he'd carried all morning. His paws met the ground quietly, like he was careful not to interrupt the world. The leash remained loose, not because of training, but because they were already moving together. The handler caught himself adjusting to the dog without thinking. When the dog slowed, he slowed. When the dog paused, he paused. Not out of obligation. Out of trust. They passed a row of small houses where curtains fluttered gently in open windows. The smell of toast drifted into the street. Somewhere inside one home, someone laughed softly. The dog's ears shifted. Just a little. The handler noticed immediately. He didn't ask. He didn't comment. He simply followed the dog's line of attention. A front porch held an elderly man rocking slowly in a chair. His eyes were closed, hands folded neatly in his lap. Nothing unusual. Nothing concerning. The dog watched him, not intensely, not urgently, but with a quiet patience that felt almost respectful. The handler felt a strange warmth spread through his chest. The dog wasn't drawn to movement. He was drawn to stillness. They continued on. The handler began to test something, gently, without pressure. When the dog slowed, he didn't immediately look for a reason. Instead, he waited to see what the dog would do next. Sometimes, nothing happened. And that was okay. Other times, the dog shifted his position subtly, placing himself a little closer to a doorway, a bench, a person standing alone. Never blocking. Never pulling. Just present. The handler realized then how much effort it took to notice these things. How easy it was to miss them when your mind was full of tasks and timelines. He wondered how long the dog had been seeing the world this way. And how long no one had noticed. They stopped near a small cafe where outdoor tables sat empty in the late morning lull. A woman wiped down a table slowly, her movements tired but careful. The dog's tail gave one gentle sway. The handler felt it again, that quiet pull. He watched the woman more closely. The way she paused between motions. The way her shoulders dipped when she thought no one was looking. The dog lowered himself into a sit. No command. The handler didn't react right away. He let the moment breathe. "You're noticing her, aren't you?" he said softly. The dog remained still. The handler didn't approach. Didn't interrupt. He just stood there, sharing the space the dog had chosen. After a moment, the woman glanced up. She smiled faintly when she saw them. Not a big smile. Just a tired one. The dog's ears relaxed. That was it. No interaction. No exchange. Just a moment acknowledged. As they walked away, the handler felt something settle deep inside him. A realization he hadn't expected. This dog wasn't looking for problems to solve. He was recognizing people who needed to be seen. The handler remembered the laughter. The whispers. The word useless. He felt it differently now. Maybe the dog wasn't meant to be loud. Maybe he wasn't meant to be impressive. Maybe his purpose was quieter. They turned onto a longer stretch of road where the sun poured down freely. Heat rose gently from the pavement. The dog panted lightly, tongue just visible, pace still steady. The handler broke the silence. "You know," he said, voice low, almost thoughtful, "people don't always notice things like you do." The dog glanced up briefly, eyes soft. The handler smiled. "I'm starting to think that's their loss." The radio crackled again, routine chatter, check-ins. The handler responded automatically, his voice calm. But his attention stayed split now. Half on the world as he'd always known it. Half on the world the dog was quietly revealing. They reached a shaded area beneath tall trees. The light dappled the ground in slow-moving patterns. The dog paused, then lay down. The handler stopped with him. No one questioned it this time. Another officer glanced over, then looked away. The moment didn't feel strange anymore. The handler crouched beside the dog, resting his forearms on his knees. "You don't rush things, do you?" he murmured. The dog breathed out slowly. In that simple exhale, the handler felt a lesson he hadn't known he needed. That not everything important announces itself. That some truths arrive softly. And that maybe, the dog everyone laughed at wasn't behind it all. He was simply waiting for others to slow down enough to catch up. As the dog stood again and they resumed their walk, the handler felt ready for whatever came next. Not because he knew what it would be, but because he finally understood how to listen. The afternoon light shifted almost without warning. Not darker, just softer. Shadows stretched longer along the sidewalk, blurring the sharp edges of the morning. The patrol slowed naturally, conversations thinning out as the day settled into a gentler rhythm. The handler felt it in his body before he named it. Trust. Not the kind written into training manuals. Not the kind tested in drills. The kind that grows when you stop questioning every pause. The dog walked beside him, calm as ever. His presence had become familiar in a new way, like background music you don't notice until it stops. The handler realized he hadn't tightened the leash once in over an hour. He didn't need to. They passed a row of parked cars shimmering faintly in the heat. Reflections danced across windshields. The dog's ears flicked briefly, then settled. The handler followed his gaze again, this time without effort. A young man stood near the curb, staring at his phone, shoulders slightly hunched. He didn't look upset. Just, alone in his own thoughts. The dog slowed. The handler slowed with him. They didn't stop. They didn't approach. They simply existed in the same space for a few seconds longer than necessary. The young man looked up. His eyes met the dog's. He smiled, small, surprised, genuine. The dog's tail moved once. Then they walked on. The handler felt something warm unfold in his chest. Not pride. Gratitude. He was beginning to understand what the dog offered, not moments that demanded attention, but moments that gave it. They reached a quieter block where the houses sat farther apart. Wind moved through trees in slow waves. Leaves whispered against each other. The dog paused again. This time, the handler didn't hesitate. He stopped. He waited. The dog stood still, head angled slightly toward a small house with pale curtains drawn halfway. Nothing seemed unusual. No sound. No movement. The handler felt the old instinct rise, the urge to move on, to keep pace. He let it pass. He trusted the stillness. They waited like that for nearly a minute. It felt longer. Time stretched, but it didn't feel wasted. Finally, the front door opened. A woman stepped out, squinting into the light. She looked surprised to see them. Then relieved. "Oh," she said softly, pressing a hand to her chest. "I thought I imagined you." The handler straightened. "Everything okay?" She nodded. "Yeah. Just had one of those moments. Fresh air helps." The dog's posture eased. His ears relaxed. He leaned slightly closer to the handler's leg. The woman smiled at him. "He's gentle." The handler nodded, feeling the truth of it settle deeper than before. "Yes," he said. "He really is." As they moved on, the handler replayed the moment in his mind, not because it was dramatic, but because it was meaningful. The dog hadn't fixed anything. He'd simply been present at the right time. That felt important. Later, they stopped near a small community center. Children's drawings were taped inside the windows. Bright colors. Uneven lines. Honest art. The dog sat, watching the doorway. The handler leaned against a nearby post, arms crossed loosely. He let the silence stretch. "You know," he said quietly, "they used to say you didn't have what it takes." The dog's ears flicked, but he didn't look up. "They said you were too soft." The handler exhaled. "I think they were wrong." The dog turned then, eyes meeting his. There was no excitement there. No triumph. Just calm understanding. Something about that look stayed with the handler. It wasn't approval. It was partnership. As the afternoon edged toward evening, the handler felt lighter. Not because the day had been easy, but because it had been honest. He realized he hadn't once tried to test the dog. Hadn't pushed him to prove anything. And the dog, in return, had shown him more than any test ever could. They headed back toward the station as the sun dipped lower, bathing the street in amber light. The dog walked close, shoulder brushing the handler's leg now and then. Not by accident. By choice. The handler reached down briefly, resting his hand on the dog's back. "Thanks for slowing me down," he said. The dog didn't respond. He didn't need to. Because trust, the handler was learning, wasn't something you declared. It was something you practiced, one quiet step at a time. The sky had softened into late afternoon hues, pale blue melting into warm amber. The patrol routes circled back through familiar streets, but nothing felt routine anymore. Not to the handler. And not to the dog. They moved together now with an unspoken rhythm. The handler no longer checked his watch as often. The dog no longer needed subtle adjustments. Each step felt shared. They passed a small corner store where the door chimed softly as customers came and went. The smell of baked bread drifted out briefly before the door closed again. The dog slowed. The handler slowed too. Inside the store, an older cashier leaned against the counter, rubbing his wrist. His movements were slow, not strained, just tired. The dog watched him through the glass. The handler noticed something new. The dog wasn't reacting to pain. He was responding to weariness. The handler felt a quiet ache of recognition. He knew that feeling. He'd carried it himself more than once, long days, quiet nights, the weight of simply continuing. The dog sat. The handler stayed standing, resting his weight on one leg, letting the moment exist. After a few seconds, the cashier looked up and noticed them. He smiled, lifting a hand in a small wave. The dog's tail tapped the ground once. Nothing else happened. And yet, it felt complete. They continued down the block. "You notice tired people," the handler said quietly, more to himself than the dog. The dog walked on, ears relaxed, gaze forward. The handler wondered how many moments like that the dog had experienced before, moments dismissed because they didn't look like success. How many times the dog had done exactly what he was meant to do, and no one had noticed. They reached a residential street where the houses sat closer together. Porch lights flicked on one by one as the afternoon faded. The dog's pace changed again, just slightly. The handler felt it instantly now. The dog turned his head toward a small house near the end of the street. The front porch was empty. No movement. No sound. Still, the dog watched. The handler followed his gaze and noticed something he might have overlooked before. The porch light was on. Even though the sun hadn't fully set yet. They stopped. The handler didn't question it. They waited. A few moments passed. Then the door opened slowly. A young girl stepped out, holding a phone in both hands. She looked around, uncertain, then relaxed slightly when she saw them. "Hi," she said softly. The handler smiled. "Hey there." She hesitated, then spoke again. "My mom said you'd be walking by." The handler glanced down at the dog. The dog stood calmly, tail still, eyes gentle. She said, "If I felt nervous, I could come outside." The handler nodded. "That's good advice." The girl smiled faintly. "Your dog's nice." "He is," the handler said. The dog lowered himself into a sit, giving the girl space without stepping closer. She watched him for a moment, then waved shyly. The dog's tail moved once. The handler felt something warm bloom behind his ribs. As they walked away, the handler understood something he hadn't before. The dog wasn't sensing danger. He was sensing thresholds. Moments when people stood between holding on and letting go. Between staying inside and stepping out. Between being unseen and being noticed. The handler slowed, letting that realization settle. They reached the end of the block where the street opened into a wide view of the town below. Lights flickered on in the distance like small stars. The dog stopped and stood beside the handler, looking out. The handler rested his hands on his belt, breathing in the cool air. "You know," he said softly, "people don't laugh as much anymore." The dog didn't look back. "They're starting to see you." The handler paused, then corrected himself. "They're starting to feel you." The dog's presence had begun to ripple outward. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But steadily. The handler realized this was the beginning of the reveal, not a single moment, but a pattern. A truth forming piece by piece. This dog wasn't meant to lead with strength. He led with empathy. And once you noticed that, you couldn't unsee it. As they turned back toward the station, the handler felt a quiet certainty settle in. The laughter hadn't disappeared by accident. It had been replaced by understanding. Evening arrived without ceremony. The sky dimmed slowly, like a light being turned down with care. Street lamps flickered on one by one, casting warm circles under the pavement. The air cooled just enough to make breathing feel easier. The patrol was nearly over. The handler felt it in his legs, in his shoulders, but also somewhere deeper. A sense of completion he hadn't expected from an ordinary shift. The dog walked beside him, steady and unhurried. No one laughed anymore. People still noticed him, but differently now. Smiles lingered longer. Eyes softened when they passed. A few people even nodded, not to the handler, but to the dog. As if they understood. They reached a quiet stretch near the edge of town where houses gave way to a small walking path. The path curved gently, bordered by low grass and a few benches worn smooth by time. The dog slowed. The handler slowed too. They stopped near one of the benches. An older woman sat there alone, hands folded in her lap, staring out at the darkening sky. She wasn't crying. She wasn't visibly upset. She was waiting. The dog stood still, ears relaxed, posture calm. He didn't move toward her. He didn't sit. He simply stayed. The handler felt the moment settle around them like a held breath. He didn't speak. He didn't interrupt. After a while, the woman turned her head and noticed them. Her eyes lingered on the dog. "He's a gentle one," she said quietly. The handler nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She smiled faintly. "I can tell." The dog lowered himself into a sit, gaze soft. His presence felt like an invitation, but not a demand. The woman took a slow breath. "I come here every evening," she said. "Helps me remember to breathe." The handler didn't rush to respond. He let the silence hold the space. The dog's tail rested still against the ground. "My husband used to walk this path with me," she continued. "He liked to sit right here." The handler felt the weight of the words, but also their warmth. The dog leaned slightly forward, just enough to be felt. The woman reached out without thinking, resting her hand lightly on the dog's shoulder. He didn't flinch. Didn't move. He accepted. Her shoulders eased. They stayed like that for a long moment, no rush, no pressure. Just three beings sharing the same quiet. When the woman finally stood, she smiled again. This time, it reached her eyes. "Thank you," she said, not to the handler, but to the dog. The dog's tail moved once. As they walked away, the handler felt something shift fully into place. This was it. Not a discovery. Not a reveal that made headlines. But a truth that landed gently and stayed. The dog wasn't here to prove himself in moments of urgency. He was here for moments like this. Moments when people needed grounding. Presence. Permission to feel. The handler stopped briefly under a street lamp, looking down at the dog. "They were wrong about you," he said softly. The dog looked up, eyes calm. "They said you were useless." The handler shook his head slowly. "They just didn't know what to look for." The dog stood, ready to move on. The handler followed. As they headed back toward the station, the handler realized something else too. This dog had changed the patrol, but he'd also changed the handler. He taught him to slow down. To notice. To trust quiet moments. And that lesson would stay long after the shift ended. The station lights glowed softly as they returned. Not harsh. Not cold. Just steady, like the day itself had been. The handler unclipped the leash, letting it rest loosely in his hand as the dog stepped inside. The familiar sounds surrounded them, quiet footsteps, muted voices, the hum of machines settling down for the night. But something felt different now. The dog wasn't the same dog people barely noticed. And the handler wasn't the same man who'd once accepted that. As they moved through the hallway, another officer paused near the lockers, watching the dog pass. "You know," he said, hesitating, "I've been meaning to ask." The handler stopped. "That rescue dog of yours," the officer continued. "He's calm. Different." The handler nodded. "Yeah." The officer scratched his head, choosing his words. "I saw him earlier. With that woman on the path." The handler said nothing. "He didn't do anything," the officer added. "But she looked lighter when she stood up." The handler felt a slow smile form. "That's kind of his thing," he said. Later, in the quiet of the kennel area, the handler knelt to remove the dog's vest. The fabric slid away easily, revealing the same unremarkable coat beneath. No medals. No markings of achievement. Just a dog. And yet... The handler paused, hands resting briefly on the dog's shoulders. "You've been doing this the whole time, haven't you?" he murmured. The dog looked back at him, eyes steady. The handler thought about the rescue notes again. The assessments. The quiet conclusions. Limited drive. Low intensity. Better suited for calm environments. They hadn't been wrong. They just misunderstood what that meant. This dog didn't surge forward. He anchored. He didn't chase problems. He created space where people could breathe again. The handler sat back on his heels, letting the truth fully settle. The laughter hadn't come from cruelty. It had come from comparison. They'd measured the dog against the wrong standard. Not every dog was meant to run fast. Not every dog was meant to bark loud. Not every contribution looked impressive from the outside. Some were meant to stay. To notice. To hold quiet moments steady. A voice echoed faintly down the hall. Someone telling a story. Someone laughing, not at the dog this time, but with warmth. The handler stood and clipped the leash back on loosely. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's go say goodnight." They walked past a small office where a new recruit sat alone, shoulders tense, staring at paperwork. The dog slowed, just slightly. The handler noticed. He didn't stop. He didn't need to. The recruit looked up, caught the dog's eye, and smiled without realizing why. The dog walked on. The handler felt his throat tighten, not from sadness, but from recognition. This was the truth. The dog had never been useless. He had been precise. Perfectly tuned to moments that didn't ask for fixing, only for presence. And now that the handler saw it, he knew he'd never unsee it again. Because once you understand what someone is truly meant to do, you stop asking them to be anything else. Morning returned the next day the same way it always did. Soft light. Calm streets. Another beginning that didn't announce itself. The handler clipped the leash on with familiar ease. The dog stepped forward, posture relaxed, eyes open to the world in his own quiet way. Nothing about him had changed overnight. And yet, everything had. As they stepped outside, people noticed. Not with curiosity. Not with amusement. With warmth. A woman watering plants paused and smiled at the dog. A man opening his shop door nodded slowly. Someone across the street lifted a hand in greeting. The dog acknowledged none of it directly. He didn't need to. His presence spoke for him now. They walked the same route as the day before. Same sidewalks. Same corners. Same gentle sounds of life starting up again. But the handler walked differently. He didn't rush. He didn't scan impatiently. He watched the dog, and through him, he watched people. The dog slowed near the cafe again. The woman from yesterday was there, wiping tables. This time, she noticed them first. "Morning," she called softly. The handler smiled. "Morning." She looked at the dog. "I slept better last night," she said, almost surprised by her own words. The handler nodded, understanding more than he could explain. The dog's tail moved once. They moved on. Later, near the park, the older woman sat on the bench again. She waved when she saw them. Her posture looked easier today. Lighter. The dog paused, just for a moment. The handler paused with him. That was enough. By midday, the handler realized something quietly profound. This wasn't a story people would tell loudly. It wouldn't make headlines. But it would live on in small ways. In steadier breaths. In softened shoulders. In moments where someone felt less alone without knowing why. As the patrol ended and they headed back, the handler knelt beside the dog one last time. "They were wrong," he said softly. "Not because you proved them wrong." He rested his forehead briefly against the dog's. But because they never knew what to look for. The dog stood, calm and steady, ready for whatever came next. And that was the victory. Not applause. Not recognition. But belonging. The laughter was gone now, not replaced by praise, but by respect. The dog everyone had called useless had done exactly what he was meant to do. He had reminded people, quietly, gently. That presence can be powerful. That stillness can heal. And that sometimes, the most important work is simply staying.